A huge welcome to this Interpreting Wine's first ever sustainability series. In this 4-part series, we first go inside Portuguese company Cork Supply, exploring the company's workings inside and out, which may well make you reassess the sustainability of the various ways of closing a wine bottle. Before we look at the question of the bottle itself, speaking with an innovative startup, Garçon Wines, who think they've discovered the future of wine packaging. If you haven't already, do be sure to subscribe to the podcast at interpretingwine.com/listen. Today's episode of the Sustainability Series features Monika Michalski, Global Head of Marketing and Communications at Cork Supply. We hear her origin story and transition into the business. Before hearing the story of Cork Supply, we get an overview of the problem of TCA and how you might recognize it. Before talking brand building, Cork and the environment, sustainability in all its guises, premiumisation in Portugal and Portuguese wines, and getting the word out there to the end consumer. Enjoy.
I'm Monika Michalski. I have been working for Cork Supply for almost 4 years, but at the same time I've kind of been working for this since I was born. So my father founded the company in 1981, and I consider the company my older sibling because I was born in 84. I only joined the company 4 years ago. So I always knew that my path was marketing communication without really, I guess, knowing what that was. But I was an avid collector of cool ads that I would see in like magazines and stuff. And when I went to university, knew already kind of communication was what I wanted to be learning more about. And corks were never a part of that. So I never really spent much time thinking about that or thinking if that was my path. So I followed kind of your traditional, went to university, studied marketing communication, graduated, and began my career always in marketing and communication. So started out for a kind of a large infrastructure company, realized quite quickly that I was bored and realized at the same time I didn't know enough to just be dedicated to one company. To learn, I felt like I needed to be on the creative side of things. So I kind of took a step sideways and joined the creative universe and started working in branding and advertising and worked on the agency side for quite some years, around 5-6 years. And then from there, I actually moved to Switzerland and started working for a startup company. So a startup company that was working in sports and social media, creating platforms for clubs. And again, I was on the creative side of things, coming up with campaigns and so on. And then out of nowhere, my father asked me one day, he said, we're starting to invest more in marketing and communication in the company. We've never had someone dedicated to marketing and communication for the European market. I think you'd be a great person for this role. Would you be interested? And it was kind of like I just, uprooted and moved to Switzerland with my husband. Do I all of a sudden want to move back to Portugal? Do I want to be a part of the family company? And he's like, by the way, you have like a week to decide. I was like, thanks for the heads up. And so it was kind of clear, though, that it was, for me, the way things were kind of at home, my dad was always very clear that we would never join the company just because we're his kids. And at the same time, so we'd have to prove ourselves to be a part of the company, and we'd have to be beneficial to the company. And at the same time, he was very clear about, I'm never going to push this upon you. So it has to be a combination of you being right for the company, being a good fit, and you also wanting to do it. So it was kind of an interesting time for me, because it was like, okay, I have a week to make this kind of life-altering decision, but it's something that we've always really valued about my dad. It's a great story. It was his life. It is his life. And it's obviously fun to be a part of while he's around and involved in the business. So we quickly decided, all right, this is the decision. So I moved back to Porto, and I've been here for 4 years. So when I started working for the company, I was dedicated to the European market alone, and in roughly a year and a half ago, became the global head of marketing and communication for the group.
Yeah, I love the analogy there of the company being like your older sibling, and kind of growing up with the sibling, and I think it would be helpful, I guess, to kind of introduce us to that sibling, and like through your eyes, where is that sibling in its development? What is it like? Kind of introduce us to them through your eyes.
So let's see. Now you said sibling, and I have to think of it. Do I like the older sibling, or do I not? Do we get along? Did we fight over clothes? No, so it's, my dad was really young when he started the company. He was 25. And I think, what was I doing in my life when I was 25? Not starting a company, for sure. So he moved to the U.S. in the early 80s and founded the company. And then along came the rest of the siblings. So my sister, my brother, and I, we were all born in the U.S. And the company for the first 10 years, so up into the early 90s, all we had was Cork Supply in the U.S., and we were distributing products. So we weren't yet in production. We were just merely on the sales side of things. So we were purchasing corks in Portugal and distributing them in the U.S. So we had a finishing plant that was based in the U.S., specifically in California for the wine market. And that's how we operated for the first 10 years of our existence. In the early 90s, we opened up a similar finishing plant in Australia and set up again the same business structure. So we were buying corks here in Portugal, distributing them in Australia, and obviously doing the finishing all in Australia for our Australian customers. And then what happened is kind of mid-90s, what we like to call the black era of cork was when TCA became a real big issue. We decided to open up a quality control lab here in Portugal, which was pretty much the first of its kind. Not pretty much, it was the first of its kind. The reason we did this was we had really high concerns for the quality that customers were demanding and not receiving. And for us, it was a difficult position to be in because we were kind of the middleman, right? So we're saying we're going to get you this quality, we're looking for that quality and finding it impossible to get. So we set up a quality control lab that would essentially control all of the corks that we were potentially purchasing, making decisions if we were going to purchase them, and then bring them into the US and bring them into Australia. It really, I think, for the cork industry was kind of a transitional point in our history, because we really taught the industry what quality control was. It wasn't an issue up until that point. Nobody had in-house labs. That just simply did not exist. Today, this industry would not exist without it. At that time, it wasn't a part of the industry. And it came to a point where we even had people who were not our customers asking us to run some quality control tests for them. So it was a big thing. And it's really, I think, been the turning point of what makes Cork Supply. We all talk about quality. We all talk about control. But you who have just visited us, you walk in and the first thing you see is the lab. It's not by accident. That's really the heart of who we are. That's where we put most of our efforts. We mentioned today, 16% of our employees worldwide are dedicated to quality control and research and development. That's a huge number for any industry. For this industry, that's unheard of. So that was what happened in the mid-90s. And then our growth has been, I was going to say pretty normal, but of course there have been some things that have been less normal. So I think a little bit of what makes, kind of if you look at our company's history, there's a couple things that pop out. We're a company that pretty much is really customer focused. So if we see that our customers are asking for products that we don't have, but that are an added value to the marketplace, we will find a way of either partnering up with somebody who has those products and helping them distribute them, or eventually going into the production of those products. So again, pretty dramatically, so to speak, in the late 90s, we started a partnership with Noma Cork, and we distribute Noma Cork synthetic closures in the US and Australia as well. At the time, for a cork company to be partnering with the enemy, so to speak, was a huge thing, and we were not really loved in Portugal for having done that. But our vision is really, at the end of the day, we're interested in what our customers want, and we have to be ready to embrace that tomorrow could be different, and follow it. So not close our doors and shy away from what tomorrow is bringing us, but finding a way of still maintaining relevance and maintaining our, being true to our DNA and to our values, but looking forwards and finding how we can continue to grow with the marketplace. So beyond that point, then our growth was more traditional. So we went into, all of the main markets for wine. So today we are in the main wine markets with either finishing plants or sales teams on the ground. So in Europe, the traditional markets, and we went into Italy and France and Spain and Argentina and more recently China. So, the company today is everywhere that I think it needs to be. And looking always into new business opportunities when it makes sense for us.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. And I think, I know that a lot of my listeners are in the trade, they are sommeliers and they're wine buyers and people who have an awareness of TCA and what it entails. But I also know that I have a percentage of listeners who are, interested consumers. And, I do like to keep the tone where it's accessible to everybody. It's not kind of just a trade podcast. It's not just for people in the wine trade. So I think it might help to just take a step back and talk a bit about TCA, and I think, again, just in your own words, talk us through, what do we know about TCA? And I guess perhaps more importantly for some of the listeners, how might they recognize it if they open something at home? What might they experience in the glass that they may recognize as TCA?
TCA is essentially, it's a molecule, and it's a molecule that can be found in many things. It's not specific to cork, and I think that's the first thing that's important for people to understand is it became kind of like the cork's enemy, and everybody talks about TCA, but it's a molecule that can be found in things that we use every day at home. It can be found in water. Water is a huge source of TCA contamination. Coffee is another place where TCA is an issue as well. So maybe more commonly, if we're talking about kind of wines and again cork closures, I think everybody has their own way of identifying what TCA is. For me, TCA smells like chlorine. So like if I were in a pool, in a closed pool, and that very strong sense of chlorine, that's what TCA smells like to me. Some people say wet newspaper or wet cardboard. To me, that's what works the best. So I think if you're looking at a wine, if you know the wine well enough, if you've had more than one bottle, sometimes the way you can tell that there could be TCA in the wine is that the flavors are maybe not so evident, a little masked. Somehow the wine seems a bit dull. If you're smelling a cork, you would more typically smell, again, whatever that identifier is. For me, it's chlorine, wet newspaper. So it has different impacts on the cork and then again in the wine.
I like that explanation because I think it also gets to the heart of the problem. It's obviously not nice to open up a bottle of wine that you've been looking forward to and you've invested your time and energy in, and then to kind of have that moment ruined, as it were. But equally, those sorts of defects should be a small percentage of the time. It shouldn't be that you're kind of opening a bottle expecting TCA. It usually is a surprise, and thankfully it is usually kind of in the minority. So given that, as you say, we've been doing this tour and I've been sharing pictures and I'm going to be sharing, I guess, more technical information about the tour. We don't really need to get into the technical elements here. So what I'm really curious to unpick with you is to, play to your strengths and, get you to tell us about, brand building and communication. What does that look like for Cork Supply?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting kind of challenge for me, because when I joined the company had been up and running for like 35 years. So that's a loaded history. And what I quickly started seeing was our brand awareness levels across the different countries were just drastically different. In the US, since that's where it all began, I think we're kind of at the peak of what you could see in terms of brand awareness. People reference us. People know us. They know personally the founders because they worked with them. So we're just at a different level. It's a different game there. So the type of things we can do in terms of marketing communication are just different. We also have an advantage that our name is very obvious and it says exactly what we do, right? So if you're an English speaker, Cork Supply, okay, these guys produce corks. We don't really need to know much more. They said it all. And then when you come to Europe, we started producing corks, and we didn't really talk much about that early when I talked about the company's history, but we had been up and running for 20 years before we got almost into the production of corks. And so our story in Europe starts with production, and then only later did we start venturing into European markets in terms of sales. And so our brand awareness in Europe is just at a complete different level than the rest of the New World markets. Our company, started opposite to what most companies did. We went to the New World markets, got our feet in there, created our story there, and then came back to the traditional markets, which is interesting. So it's been an interesting time for me, because when I joined the company, again, my focus was the European market, and I was dealing with markets that struggle pronouncing our name. So Cork Supply, that just seems something so, basic in English. When you go to France or when you go to Spain, people struggle with our name, which obviously doesn't help brand awareness. So if you can't say a name, you're more likely to forget that we exist. And then, when you're dealing with markets like Spain or France, the cultural diversity is so rich from region to region that you're talking to completely different types of winemakers. And so you really need to, understand what it is to be French, and then what it means to be a French person from Bordeaux, or a French winemaker from Bordeaux, or Burgundy. They're two different mindsets. So it's then understanding, how can I make, my company has a message and a voice, and how can I adapt that to speak to specifically what people are looking for in Bordeaux? And then the added challenge is we are a B2B business. So most of our communication and marketing is done face-to-face through our sales team. So then the added challenge is, how do you get salespeople to understand that they're a fundamental part of what makes our brand us? And some of these people had been with the company for a long time. So then all of a sudden in comes a marketing person who's like trying to get a salesperson to do extra than what they've been used to. And that's also an added challenge. And then I think what I'm facing now is the biggest challenge is social media is a huge thing. When I went to university, social media was just beginning. So I was in the US studying, and Facebook was born. So I think I was in my second year of university, and Facebook was born just for US universities. And so in my studies, social media wasn't a part of what I was learning. I was learning all about communication and marketing, but social media didn't play any part of this. And all of a sudden I'm in a B2B business, and social media is something that we need to consider. And so how do you use social media in a B2B environment? How can you make your messages relevant? Where are your followers? Are they on Facebook? Are they on Instagram? Are they interested in hearing about what you have to say in their time on social media? So this is... this is the first time we've done a podcast, and that says a lot. We're embracing it and definitely looking into new channels and exploring and what that means for us.
I fully appreciate that B2B is where you're at, and you really are communicating and building those relationships with the winemakers, with the creators of the wine who want to ensure that their product gets to the end consumer in the best possible shape. So that completely makes sense. I will just share something that, as I say, is super up to date. I'm kind of putting on my Instagram, I'm putting videos and pictures from the trip. And, the very first picture I put up was around the harvesting of the cork. And most of the comments are, from people who are interested in wine and were, very positive and just, interested to see how it happens, where cork comes from. Because I do like to give everybody their air and air different opinions. I did have a couple of comments on there that were criticizing cork, that were saying that it, kind of poor tree, it's damaging to the environment. And yeah, there isn't really a specific question there. I'm just, curious, what might you say to somebody, who raises that kind of sustainability / environmental area and says, hold on, we've got screw caps, we can reuse some of our plastic to make the synthetic corks. We don't need to be harvesting from cork trees anymore. What's your sort of reaction to that?
My first reaction is ouch. And then my second reaction is actually, in comparison to industries like paper, for example, or even making barrels, we're not killing trees. That's, I think, the first most important thing for people to understand. We're not damaging them in any way. So you heard a lot about this yesterday when we were down in the Lisbon area, but basically when we're harvesting trees, we're harvesting at a specific time in that new cells are basically generating themselves. So it's actually the perfect time to peel off the bark because we're not damaging anything, we're preserving the tree. And so we're not putting the tree into any sort of distress. And if you notice also in harvest, you don't take the entire bark off of the tree. So you leave, I think it's roughly 75% is taken off and 25% is kept on the tree. Because then, yes, if you were to fully strip a tree, they would go into huge distress. And so I think that's the first important myth to kind of tear down, so to speak, is this is actually something that we work alongside the tree. And we know that the more well treated they are, also the better the quality that we're getting off of the tree in terms of raw materials. So we actually invest a lot of time into, and maybe I can take a step back, is we don't own cork forests. So they're privately owned. We work with families, we work with growers, and so we're really interested in actually kind of educating, so to speak, some of these families and growers that don't really know a lot about cork forests, how to help manage it, how to help better preserve it, how to create the best environment for trees to live longer and happier lives. It's obviously in our interest because the better the trees are preserved, the better the quality that we're getting for our corks. So maybe that's the kind of the first part of that. The second part, in terms of comparison to synthetics and screw caps, would be essentially at the end of the day, you can't be more sustainable than a natural cork closure. And I refer specifically to natural cork because we can't really speak for the technicals in terms of this. The process is different. But when you're looking at a natural cork, it is the closure with the least carbon footprint. So we're negative. And you can't say the same. I won't say specific numbers because I'll let them do that. But in terms of a closure, you can't be more sustainable than natural cork. So I'd invite anybody to come, visit us and ask us questions, because it's actually, in this day and age, it makes more and more sense to have closures like a natural cork, because of everything that we're finding out about how we've treated our planet and our concerns of the future.
For me, sustainability is about trees, is about the soil, is about grass, is about the things that we classically associate with the environment. But, I do tend to go beyond that to looking at communities and people. At the end of the day, rural jobs, the sort of mass exodus of rural communities to cities. There's lots of regions and lots of countryside areas all around the world that I think are really struggling. And I think, having been to the forest yesterday and seeing the skill that people use when they're harvesting the bark, it provides jobs. And I saw lots of young guys out there. There's a kind of a range of ages out there. So I don't think it's necessarily, as simple. Sustainability for me, it's not just as simple as just looking at the tree. I think you've got to look at all the things around it. And actually, if you kind of take a step back, what would the value of the cork tree be if the cork industry wasn't there? Personally, I don't see that it's necessarily as black and white as you're taking something from a tree, therefore you're A, damaging the environment, and B, you're doing something wrong in terms of sustainability.
Yes, it's interesting that you bring that up because, cork for Portugal is our biggest export. So that in itself says a lot. Our economy depends a lot on this tree. We have 3 different production units in Portugal. In Portugal alone, roughly 400 people working for Cork Supply. It's a lot of people. That's a lot of responsibility. And people often ask us, you have the unit that you visited yesterday, Lawrence, was down south in Lisbon, and it takes care of all of the preparation of the raw material. And then you ship everything up to Porto to be transformed, and that's a 3-hour car ride. For you guys, it was more like a 4-hour, but it's a 3-hour car ride. So a lot of people ask us, why don't you put all of your units together? Whether that's in Lisbon or whether that's in Porto. It's a valid question, and maybe from a financial perspective, it would make more sense. But in terms of what you're kind of mentioning, in terms of social responsibility, we've created communities that are kind of fully dependent on this industry. So if you were to move the production units from this region up in the north down south, you'd lose know-how. So you'd move it to a region where people don't know how to produce corks. That's not part of their history. This is an industry that is very generational. So, we have people who have worked in this company for 20 years. You met 2 today that have been with the company 25 years and 20 years. And a lot of the people you see in production have been here for maybe all of their careers. And so we really care about the people that we're working with. So, we don't just make decisions like uprooting companies and not thinking about the people who are a part of what we've become. So, to your point, social responsibilities is a huge part of the company, and that's just kind of at the heart of what we do. People comes first, whether that's a customer, whether that's, the people that are a part of our company. Automation has become a huge part of most industries. And you've visited our plant today, and you've seen in terms of production that we have a fair amount of technology in part of what we're doing. Could we have more technology? Could we automate things more? Maybe we could, but there's also a respect for tradition, for people, for, the role that we play in as a company. So a lot of these factors, as you said, are not so black and white. There's a big gray room there, and I think companies with the size of ours have to, put on a different thinking cap and remember that they play a big role in countries like the size of Portugal.
I also think it's super interesting that we're here close to Porto, a place that's got a sort of mythical connection with the port industry and latterly still wine production in the Douro Valley, where I see and I sense a lot of change happening, and I think a sort of a premiumization as well of the product over there. And so I just invite you to, I guess, make some connections between yourselves who are selling and promoting premium product and something that's going to perform at the highest level with that industry in Portugal that is, I think, seeking a more sort of premium place in the marketplace.
So for us, it's been an interesting transition as well in Portugal, because as you said, we're positioned on the premium side of things. So traditionally, if we go back a little bit, Portugal was not really on the map for wines, or let's say like high quality wines. We were not really of the most famous countries in Europe. And that's changed a lot in the past couple of years, along with tourism too. So I think these kind of go hand in hand. Premium tourism, exactly. And so, it's been an interesting time for us because, let's put it this way. Our position within packaging is always an interesting dynamic, because we are a really important part, not to say the fundamental part, of preserving a wine in the bottle. yet you don't see us. So if you're a customer and you're looking at a bottle of wine, you see the label, you see the shape of the bottle, you can feel how heavy the bottle is, you can see the type of, if they have a tin foil or what it is that they're using on top, or if they have the wax. They don't see the closure. So the closure is not actually a part of your decision-making process. It's something you engage with once you've opened a bottle. Yet we're, again, super important in the final outcome of a wine. So in markets where wines traditionally maybe were not so expensive, how much of an importance do you give to the closure? How much of your budget are you ready to allocate to the closure? And unfortunately, usually it's not a lot. Unless we're talking about premium wines, then the conversation is completely different. But, your average table wine, how much are you going to put into a closure? And so kind of going back to this idea of, Portugal, for a long time, Portugal just had struggled with our brand image in terms of wines. So we didn't have the best image. So it was very hard for us to value our product and find, a decent price for our wines in the marketplace. And so for us, it was a more challenging market to be within, because if you have a premium product, how are you competing for, a position in wines that maybe cannot afford a premium product yet? That's transitioned drastically over the past years. So, our more expensive products that you've come to know over these past days, the DS100, which is the sensory analysis that we're performing on each and every cork, has grown exponentially here in Portugal. Our technical product line, again on the more expensive side of things, the Vink line, again has grown exponentially in the past 2 years. So it's really interesting to see how Portugal has transitioned in the wine sphere, and how we as a company have also transitioned in this market.
This has been a really fantastic couple of days for me. I've really enjoyed this. I think my reflections, in the immediate kind of aftermath have been just, I never thought about cork before. Literally pull it out the bottle and I'd sniff the cork. I didn't know what I was sniffing. It was, you see sommeliers sniffing it, you see winemakers sniffing it. I was like, I don't know what I'm sniffing for. But to actually, I think, have followed the process step by step. And then just, to link that then back to my experience again, it always does come back to the experience of opening the bottle of wine that I might have been saving for ages. It might have been a special occasion. It might have been a big format. It might have been a Magnum, and then to kind of have that ruined by almost, in a sense, the final chain of the process. That then matters, doesn't it? That then you notice it, but the other times that it doesn't sort of fail, or there is no issue, then you just don't notice it. It's what I guess they call a hygiene factor. It's like, if it works, you kind of never notice it. And I guess kind of in that context, which I think talking to some of the other participants, I think they kind of think similarly. I just invite you to sort of look ahead, really, and I guess from specifically from your role and branding and marketing, and just think about like, how do you kind of, I guess, get people to kind of give a damn in the future more about the closure, about something that maybe compared to the rest of the winemaking process might not be as sexy, but is super important for protecting that moment that people have when they pop that cork.
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to that to the point where you're talking about packaging. So I think the way that the cork is hidden kind of makes everybody not really look at it. If you're at a nice restaurant and you have somebody who knows a good deal of wine, he'll take out the cork, he'll sniff the cork, he'll show you the cork, he'll even possibly leave the cork on the table. If you're at a normal restaurant, most people don't even see the cork. The cork comes out and it goes into the waiter's pocket. So how many times are you actually in contact with the cork? Very few. And that's when you're dining out. If you're dining in and opening a bottle of wine at home, that's obviously a different dynamic. So we know that, our space for communication is kind of limited, and we're much more concerned of the B2B messages. So again, we're not really talking a lot to the end consumer, not to say that that's not a fundamental part, because we firmly believe that if the consumer knows and understands more about cork, they're more likely to want their wines to be closed with natural cork closures and technical cork closures. And so we do have a Portuguese Cork Association, APCOR, and we're a member of, and a lot of the big players in the industry are members of, and we essentially pay our fees or our dues to the association, and with that money, they're putting together campaigns that are communicating specifically with consumers. So raising awareness about what is cork, kind of breaking down the barriers of this strange thing that nobody really knows a lot about, but is as soon as everybody hears a little bit about it, they're curious about it, which is great, and you see people's face light up when they start understanding that cork comes off of a bark tree and it's not something that you pick out of a tree like an apple. There's all sorts of myths that, are good to break down. So again, not to say that we're not interested in communicating with the end consumer, because it's a fundamental part of what makes this industry work. So we know that having informed consumers will also help us in the long run. But in terms of what we do with our customers, so kind of our traditional channel of communication, we've been pushing more and more sharing, kind of opening our doors, this idea of transparency. We, from January through June, have 3 to 4 customers visiting us per week. And that means 2 days dedicated to each visit. So it's become a fundamental part of just showing people how we operate, because what better way to trust somebody when you see them doing what they do, and being able to ask all sorts of questions and getting direct answers and not slight answers or I'll get back to you later. So we're firm believers in transparency, open doors. Anybody can come visit us, whether you're a tourist just curious about cork, or whether you're a winemaker here on holiday, or somebody who works with us. We're all about that. And I think it's and in that sense we're somehow, and I don't know how to tie this in, so it may seem kind of like an off note, but I think it's important for people to see that the industry is we've gone beyond just producing corks. We also produce technologies in-house, and that's a massive thing. We're producing technologies in-house to solve problems that we see that we have. Not a lot of industries do this. And I think what I'm trying to say with this is it's become kind of a really expensive game to play, so to speak. And so the suppliers that are here are investing a lot of money in making sure that we can, get to the perfect cork and find those solutions that don't ruin that end moment, because that's obviously not our goal. And we're concerned about that. And I think part of that is showing how much we're dedicating, how much resources we're putting into trying to solve our own issues. Not to say that we're perfect. We're not yet perfect. Hopefully one day we will be. But I think our company's history has really shown from day one to where we are today how we've grown and how we've kind of honed in on where are the issues and where do we need to be focusing our energy, and being able to grow without kind of losing focus on those parts.
Thank you so much, Monika. I really think you did a fantastic job of setting the scene for the episodes that will feature Cork Supply. Do, of course, be sure to check out Cork Supply's website and main social media handles below. And while you're at it, I would love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. In the next part of this 4-part sustainability series, we hear from Isabel Alegro, CEO of Cork Supply Portugal. See you then.